Okay, we're going to have a look at escaping and escapes from side control in particular, and we're going to talk a little bit about guard retention and escaping together. So we're going to try and have a look at what the best methods of trying to frame, use your legs and so on, just as a beginner to try to learn how to escape and retain your guard a little bit better. So let's talk about two different things. Let's have Sean take top position here on me. So the first thing is if Sean is already in side control, already in this position, we're talking about escapes. But let's say Sean has just passed my guard, he's got back here. We're talking about retention, getting your feet back in and being able to retain guard. So the interesting thing about what we're going to do here is that we're not going to draw a distinction between the two. There are some ways when you're in the escape position where your opponent's going to have their hands connected, have grips on you or whatever, and have their weight fully down on you, that you're going to have to learn how to create that space. That's for another day. We're going to talk about never giving that space up, okay? So, let's have a look. Sean is in the process of passing my guard with whatever guard pass he wants to use. Let's have a look at a couple of common mistakes before we do. Frames are good, and very often when people say to you, never straighten your arms, they mean in terms of submission avoidance. So I shouldn't straighten my arms when my opponent is in, say, I'm in my opponent's closed guard, or I'm on bottom pushing up, like in the bottom mount. But straightening your arms is a frame. Your straight arms here are what we call posts or frames. So using them against his neck, inside of his bicep, top of his shoulder, sometimes even his hips, are very, very good, okay? But in particular, when you have straight arms, you want to be thinking about his upper body. If you turn to his lower body or his legs here like this, once he drops his hip weight on you, that's going to crumble because that's the weight of his hips and most of his body on your wrist. However, if we attack his arm, particularly his near side arm, his top shoulder, and his bicep here like this, we can keep a good bit of space between us. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is his legs, or my legs, I should say, and the gap that I make when I make good frames. So from here, when I make good frames, a lot of times, because we learn the shrimp so much when we're talking about escapes, people confuse shrimping as a good idea when we're trying to retain guard. But in fact, if I go here and I've got good position here, knees nice and high, hands out straight in front, and I put my foot on the mat to try and shrimp away, I'm going to offer my opponent the opportunity to collapse on top of me. This unit here, this connection between my knees and elbows, is vital for retaining guard. So I want to try and keep that as much as possible. Here comes the same the same guard pass. But now I'm going to keep my knee high. I've got this foot to come on the hip here. I've got this foot to circle on the hip. I've got the ability to go over the top of his shoulder if I keep my legs off the mat. Once I let my leg on the mat, particularly this leg, we'll talk about this leg in a second, immediately what I'm going to do, my only option is going to be, if I make this space, what's going to happen to this leg is it's going to hit the mat, and now here's the space for him to collapse and crumble my hips. This is going to even happen if I have strong frames. Let's have a look at what happens when I have a strong frame. Strong frames I put down here. It doesn't matter because I've given him all this space to attack. So I think in the previous video we spoke about his passing strategies, legs, hips, upper body. When I put my feet to the mat when I'm defending my guard, I offer him my hips. So don't do that. Instead of using the shrimp, because everybody will say, well, how do I get from here to try to make space? We're going to use the kip. Okay, and I'll just do our warm-up exercise real quick. Some of you might have seen this in your warm-up and absolutely hate it, but that's what it's for. The ability to move your hips without putting your feet on the ground to return and recover the guard. Okay, so that's step one, where we're talking about retention. Straight posting frames, trying to create as much distance between you and your opponent as possible, and not putting your feet on the mat to try to make sure that you have the ability to keep your feet in contact with his hips. Okay, let's have a look at what happens when Sean gets even further down. He passes my knees and my hips, he gets to my hips, and he gets kind of to my upper body. And what this usually means is that your frames have gone from straight to bent. Once they go beyond 90 degrees here, it's very difficult. I need to work to get them to at least 90 degrees. All right, this is what happens like 90% of the time. Let's just go from your knees here for a moment. So again, people think, well, I learned how to shrimp, so I guess I'll put my foot on the mat, which just offers Sean the opportunity to sink lower. And in the end, what you end up with doing is shrimping out, burning up a lot of energy while Sean just follows you across the mat like this. Okay? So instead, we're still going to use the kip. I need to try to get my arms straight. That's going to be my job here. I got my arms bent in the bent position, but they're still at 90 degrees. They're not crushed in here like this with him crushing me. So instead, I'm going to use the kip to try and get my arms straight. So I'm not going to think, I can think about bringing my legs in. Everything can happen at once, but the only thing I'm going to think about is using this position to try and make space with my hands. So I'm going to, okay. We're bouncing our hips as we straighten our arms. We're taking our hips away from our opponent. So, yeah, let's go this way. Good thinking, Steven Spielberg. We'll go from here. So, now that's not to say the shrimp is useless. The shrimp is still very useful. It's useful, for example, in a lot of sweeps, particularly from half-guard sweeps and stuff like that. It's useful from the bottom mount position. But in terms of retention and side control, and it is occasionally, to be fair, useful in your side control escapes. But most of the time I like to see people working with the kip as opposed to shrimp because of that contact on the mat with your foot. Let's look at an alternative then, because very often, maybe you're somebody who struggles with trying to get your hips moving with just that kipping motion. Maybe it's difficult for you. If you must put a foot on the mat, try to make it your near side foot. Now, I've still got mobility with my top leg. So if you need to move, keep this glued. Now I'm defending my hips with my top knee, with my elbow, my top elbow. I'm still keeping my hand, everything is really compact. And I can use my bottom foot for here. This is very different than placing this foot down, because when this leg leaves, look at that space. It's very hard for me to retain that. And even this, keeping this knee up, while not quite a losing battle, it's very, very difficult. So even when I go here, and I keep this knee up all the time, my right knee, here's trying to move my bottom knee, but he's going to cut across that and put it on the mat. So from here, keeping this knee high is a much better strategy. Here. So, I think that'll do it. So, kipping, shrimping, or at least if you're going to shrimp or hip escape, using your bottom knee, it's a good idea. It's not like a hard and fast ironclad rule, but it's a really good idea for your guard retention and also for some of your escaping strategies. The fun bit of advice I would say is don't separate escapes from retention. Try to think about them in the same thing. Because what will happen is a lot of times is, actually let's demonstrate real quick, is that you will think of guard retention as beautiful grips, hooks, de la Riva, whatever it is, and you will think of escapes as what happens when you get here. But I want you to think of escapes, I think it's good advice to think of escapes as any time you're in difficulty and you've lost your guard. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay, see you soon.